Were Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan bigwigs complicit in Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of young women? The attorney for Epstein's accusers make that claim in new legal filings. I'm Angenette Levy, and welcome to Law&Crime's Sidebar podcast. The saga involving Jeffrey Epstein, it just seems like it's never, ever going away. Jeffrey Epstein, of course, is the convicted sex offender, but also a multimillionaire, maybe even a billionaire, who was accused by many women of treating them as sex slaves. So joining me to talk about these new claims being made in legal filings by the accusers of Jeffrey Epstein is Adam Klasfeld. He's the managing editor of lawandcrime.com and also the host of the Objections podcast produced by Law and Crime. So, Adam, welcome back to Sidebar. Thanks for coming on. These are some pretty explosive allegations, but maybe not totally surprising if you've been following this case because, Jeffrey Epstein is somebody who mingled with royalty, who mingled with former presidents. So it's not shocking for us to hear that possibly there were bigwigs with these big banks who may have known about what was going on with him.
Absolutely. That's entirely correct, Angenette. And what's happening now is there is a wave of litigation against these banks. The survivors are filing lawsuits against Deutsche. They're filing lawsuits against JP Morgan. Both of those are class actions. And the U.S. Virgin Islands has filed a separate lawsuit against JP Morgan as well. So what we're seeing now is a new wave of scrutiny specifically on the financial elite. And we're going to see that unfold for months.
So, this latest filing by David Boies, who represents a couple of different accusers of Jeffrey Epstein, claims that, there were these officials with Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan. Those are two massive, massive banks. We are talking very deep pockets here. Then that they were around when Jeffrey Epstein was doing things with these young women. Of course, we know that there were all kinds of people around when these things were going on. And his ex-girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, was convicted of, assisting and procuring these girls. She's currently serving time. So tell us, how deep does this go? And is it ever going to end? Because I just feel like there's so much that's percolating out there that we don't yet have confirmed about who could be revealed as being involved in all of this.
Right. Now, what happened today, what the legal brief that was filed today said, was that the JP Morgan, excuse me, the Deutsche Bank officials were physically present in Jeffrey Epstein's home when the victims were there. And that one of these officials actually raised questions about sex trafficking to him. It goes into what the heart of their case is. Basically, they're alleging that Deutsche Bank knew. They're alleging that JP Morgan knew when they were entering into business relationships with him, when they were Jeffrey Epstein's bank of choice. And the banks say he was just another client, that they followed all of the reasonable measures. We'll see how that stands up in court. But what's happening now is that through these survivors' lawsuits and through the separate lawsuit through the Virgin Islands government, we're having to put those banks under scrutiny. Those banks have to answer for their interactions with Epstein. And we're finding out about pretty high officials. I'll give you one example, Angenette. In a recent filing in the Virgin Islands litigation, we found out that the former CEO of Barclays Bank, who was a former senior official at JP Morgan, was allegedly in Jeffrey Epstein's private island in the Virgin Islands when Jeffrey Epstein was still in jail in the Florida case. This is more than a decade ago. So while Jeffrey Epstein was in jail, this top banker at one of the biggest banks in the world was apparently at his private island writing him a message from there. And those are the types of filings, these are the types of revelations that these lawsuits are going to get to the heart of.
What's the next step here? Because the attorneys for Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan will be allowed to respond to this. But this is pretty explosive stuff. I mean, we talk about getting to the point of doing depositions, things like that. We saw what happened with Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit. We thought, Prince Andrew's lawyers were going to take this all the way. They were going to defend this. And then all of a sudden, it went away. So, do we expect this to get that far? What do you see happening?
Well, could this quietly settle? Well, it happened before, as you noted, not only with Virginia Giuffre and the Prince Andrew case, but I think that there was a separate case against Deutsche Bank that settled for more than $20 million. It was not filed by survivors, but it was filed by their shareholders who said, hey, you got in bed with Epstein, you got in bed with Russian oligarchs. Those were the allegations of the complaint. And Deutsche Bank, after they failed to dismiss the lawsuit, entered into a settlement. So could this enter the same way? There are some reasons to think that it might. We have the same case that settled there is before the same judge. Deutsche Bank is trying to dismiss the complaint just as they did before. Will they be more successful this time? Well, we'll see. It's before the same judge. And if the judge sends it to discovery, and they do not want to release all of the information to explode into the public sphere, into a public trial, maybe they'll go to the bargaining table. So time will tell.
Time will definitely tell. And you know what, Adam? There is so much that we don't know. There are rumors, where there's smoke, there's fire, names, famous names that kind of come up from time to time involving Jeffrey Epstein. I think everybody wants to know, when are we going to find out everything? When are we going to find out who truly was involved? So we know that the feds, there have been discussions, in court during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial about other people in his midst who may have been, complicit in this. Do we think there are going to be more criminal charges? Will we ever get to the full truth?
This is a story that has been explored for more than a quarter of a century. When will the full truth be out there? Essentially, when people stop looking for corners of information. I don't mean to be cynical about it. It's the public interest in it, the press's interest in it, has kept this case alive for more than a quarter of a century. The U.S. Attorney's Office hasn't said the investigation is closed. There could be new charges. It's possible that one of these cases brings up allegations that are so explosive that the federal government has no choice but to indict. But it we've only had two criminal defendants so far, and they are Jeffrey Epstein, who is dead, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who's in prison. If more are coming, we'll be on top of that.
I think it's interesting after Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction that they didn't come out and do a victory lap press conference after she was sentenced. And that, to me, that sent a clear message to me that more could be coming down the pike. I guess we'll have to wait and see. And we know that you will be on top of it, and we will tell everybody about it as soon as we find out. So Adam Klasfeld, host of the Objections podcast and managing editor of Law&Crime.com. Thank you so much for coming on to talk with us about this. It was a great story that you put up on the website, and we hope everybody will go and read it.
Thank you for having me, Angenette.
And that's it for this edition of Law&Crime Sidebar podcast. You can listen to and download Sidebar on Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, you can always watch it on Law&Crime's YouTube channel. I'm Angenette Levy, and we will see you next time.